Section 13 of Weird Tales presents Mad Science. Read by Dale Grothman. Weird Tales presents Mad Science, The Acid in the Laboratory by Gordon Philip England. I am writing tonight in a desperate effort to keep awake. During the past few weeks, I have slept too much. I hate sleep, for slumber brings me not rest, but torturing nightmares that are slowly driving me mad. Nor are the awful visions the worst that could happen while I sleep. A more deadly menace is held over me, a threat that endangers my very life. So sleep I dare not, for it is a question of whether I should ever again awaken. If I did not awake, I should die, and how I dread death. I used to believe that death ends all, that the body returns again to dust, and that the soul is a mere fragment of overdeveloped imagination. But I am no longer an unbeliever. Now I realize that there is a supernatural. I know now that there are spirits, and how I fear to face the infuriated spirits of George and Emily. Nightly, they have tormented me with hallucinations and terrifying suggestions, but tonight I will not sleep. My eyelids are heavy, and I find it increasingly difficult to hold open my eyes, but I will not sleep. That I cannot remain awake many more nights, I know, but tonight at least I shall be free from those agonizing visions. Now for my narrative. It is 5 years since I, Harley Denton Grimsby, began practicing medicine in this little town of Oakston. I had spent 5 years at McGill University, graduating with high honors. They offered me a place on the surgical staff at the General Hospital, Montreal, but unwilling to forsake my native country, I returned to the United States and followed my profession here at Oakton. I soon gained the confidence of my patients, and at the end of 2 years had built up a considerable practice. Then, like a flash from the blue, came a stroke of unexpected fortune. A distant cousin had struck it rich in the Australian gold mines, and soon afterward had accidentally lost his life. By his will, I, as sole heir, received nearly £60,000 and became independently rich. Upon hearing of my good fortune, I immediately gave up my ordinary work and equipped myself with an up-to-date laboratory, devoting my time to medical research. At about this time, the one woman took up her residence in Oakton. The instant I saw Emily Lammerford, I knew I had met my ideal. I loved her from her golden crown of hair to the soles of her dainty little feet. And I think she might have loved me in return had it not been for George Hannington. Hannington was the head surgeon at the Oakton Hospital. A man of strong personality, laboring for the love of his patients rather than for mere fame and reputation, he was a heroic figure well calculated to fascinate such a woman as Emily, who was idealistic to the nth degree. Yet, despite her friendship with Hannington, Emily admitted that she liked me also, and I felt sure that were Hannington's influence removed, she would fulfill my fondest hopes. Believing this, I began planning how to effect his removal. At first I thought of enticing him from Oakton by offering him a position on the staff of a large Chicago hospital which friends of mine controlled. But after consideration I realized this plan was impracticable. He would correspond with Emily, would tell her his utopian ideas, and, though separated in person, would be united with her in spirit. No, that would never do. Nothing short of Hannington's death would accomplish my desire. I began to plan how I might destroy him. I thought over different means of death until my brain reeled. None of the things I thought of satisfied me. They were too dangerous. It was no part of my plan that I should suffer for my deed after slaying him. His death would affect only half my purpose. The other half would be the winning of Emily. No easy task. I thought of poison, of the knife, of disease germs. I dismissed all as unsatisfactory. I wanted something safer, something that would disintegrate and utterly destroy every vestige of my victim's body. But where could I find so mighty an implement of death? It was by accident that I finally discovered what I had sought. I had been working in my laboratory one night and had mixed several compounds to form a certain acid which I intended to use in an experiment. But when the acid was ready, I found I had made a mistake while mixing the ingredients, and instead of the acid I had desired, I had an altogether different kind. The new acid was transparent and colorless as water. Picking up a dead frog, which I had used in a former experiment, I dropped it into the vessel containing the acid, then busied myself with other work for a few minutes. Then I looked in the vessel to see what effect the acid had had upon the frog. The acid was no longer transparent, but was like roiling water in appearance. I got an iron spoon and fished about in the dish, but could find no trace of the frog. The acid had utterly devoured it. A sudden thought rushed into my mind, and for a moment its possibilities almost stunned me. Then I decided I must pursue this experiment to the end. A frog's bones are too soft. I must try something better. But what? Walking to the other end of the laboratory, I opened a small cage in which I had imprisoned several small animals, which I used for dissecting purposes. Reaching in, I caught a kitten and carried it over to the dish of acid. It squirmed for a moment in my grasp. Then I lowered it into the acid. The body disappeared with an indescribable swiftness. Flesh and bone simply melted beneath the attack of the consuming fluid. During the next week, I conducted several other tests and was completely satisfied with their results. In this incomparable acid, I held a positive means of destruction. "Now for Hannington!" I jubilantly exclaimed. It would not be difficult to entice my rival to my laboratory. Before the arrival of Emily, we had been friends, and often he had assisted me with some particularly interesting experiment. Indeed, so well had I concealed my true feelings toward him that neither he nor Emily realized my friendship had turned to hatred. Feverishly, I got ready for his reception. I made a large quantity of the acid, and carrying it into the little bathroom at the far end of the laboratory, began filling the bath. I had only poured a few drops when the smell of burning rubber attracted my attention, and after examination I saw that the acid had destroyed the rubber plug of the outlet. But after searching the laboratory, I discovered a round piece of steel which just fit the hole. Then I poured in the rest of the acid. Having made all preparations, I went to the telephone. Hannington had bachelor quarters, and his house was on the same street as mine. As I have already mentioned, we had been closely associated in experimenting along the lines of medical research, and to facilitate secrecy regarding those experiments, we had run a private line between our houses. Now I clucked with glee as I remembered this. Before giving Hannington a call, I glanced at my watch. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. A moment later, I was ringing Hannington. I rang several times before he came to the telephone. "What's the matter?" he said crossly. "I was just asleep." "Come over at once," I shouted. "I've got a surprise for you, something that will revolutionize your ideas." A new experiment was to Hannington what honey is to a bee. Eagerly, he grabbed the bait. "I'll be right over," he called back. 5 minutes later he arrived, clad in his surgeon's uniform. I surveyed him critically. Good, I told myself. Those clothes will dissolve almost instantly. There's no metal about them. Aloud I said, "You didn't see anybody on the street, did you? I'd hate to have this leak out. It's the most important experiment I've ever tried." "I didn't see a soul," he assured me, "and the street lights are off, too." "Then come on to the laboratory," I exclaimed. Quickly, he followed me through the laboratory into the bathroom. I locked the door and put the key in my pocket. And then I turned and faced him. All hell must have shone in my eyes, for instinctively he realized he was trapped. With a cry of alarm, he sprang at me. He might as well have assailed the Rock of Gibraltar. He was small and slight. I was a giant in strength. He fought desperately, but the end was never in doubt. After a moment, he fell back before my heavy blows and screamed for help. "Yes, scream," I laughed harshly. "It is a pleasure to hear you, and no one else can hear. These laboratory walls are soundproofed." "Have you gone mad?" he cried. "No," I quietly answered. "I am perfectly sane. But, Hannington, I am also determined. You have stood between me and the choice of my heart for nearly 2 years, and by heaven, you shall do so no longer." I paused while he frantically glanced about for a way of escape. Then I spoke again. "I hate you, Hannington, yet I could almost pity you because of the agony of your death. Do you see that water in that tub? Harmless looking, isn't it? Well, Hannington, you are soon going to find out exactly how harmless and innocent it is." Hannington glanced at the tub of seemingly clear water, and his face paled. Some instinct, together with my cryptic words, told him of his danger, and he partly guessed the truth. And guessing it, he became like a madman. He flung himself upon me with a rush that actually bore me to the floor. But his triumph was not of long duration. My steel muscles soon told against his, and rolling him off, I gripped him with both hands and raised him to hurl into the acid. But he struggled with my grip and beat at me desperately with his fists. I smote him to the floor. He rose again, and again I knocked him down. Finally, he stood facing me, his back toward the tub, and terror in his eyes. "Are you through?" I asked coldly. "What a fool you are, thinking you could defeat me! What a fool to come here tonight! You must have known that no man who loved Emily could ever be a friend of yours." I taunted him, tried to provoke him to further resistance, but he stood silently staring at me. At last he spoke hoarsely. "Grimsby, you win now. But this is not the end. I will return." I laughed derisively. "You fool," I said. "In a few minutes you will have ceased to exist. Your body will be entirely destroyed. Not a fragment of it will remain. And yet you talk of returning." Hannington's gaze did not falter. "It is you who are the fool, Grimsby. You can never kill the more important part of me, my soul." His words fell on me like a cold shower. For an instant I hesitated, but only for an instant. With terrific force I shot out my fist, striking him full in his jaw. Lifted from his feet, he fell backward into the acid. The disappearance of George Hannington created much excitement. Many theories were advanced to account for it, but all fell wide of the truth. The police worked indefatigably, conducting a general search throughout the town. Armed with a search warrant, they even entered my laboratory, but they found nothing. What was there to find? The disintegrated body of Hannington had disappeared down the drain pipes, and not a trace of it remained to convict me. When the police inspected the bathroom, they found nothing to arouse their suspicions. Months passed, and still the affair remained an unsolved mystery. How I used to chuckle to myself when the detectives would announce they had discovered some new clue, that Hannington had left town because of blackmailers, or for some equally improbable reason. What would they not have given to have learned the truth? During these months I was not idle. Gradually, little by little, I overcame the resistance of Emily, and finally she agreed to marry me. But though she accepted me, she did not love me. By sheer willpower I had won her. 6 months after Hannington's disappearance, I married Emily. That was my day of triumph. But that night I dreamed that George Hannington's spirit came and stood beside me and threatened me. And I woke with hair on end and cold sweat oozing from every pore. A few weeks later, I awoke to the fact that my marriage was a failure. I had married a woman whose heart belonged to a dead man. Gradually, I came to realize that, though dead, Hannington still held a mighty influence over my wife, and I became wildly jealous. One morning, about 3 months ago, I had gone to my laboratory after breakfast as usual. While there, I remembered I had left my pocket knife on my bureau. Returning for it, I saw a strange sight. Emily was standing with her back to the door, and in her hands was a miniature of Hannington. And while I looked, she pressed her lips tenderly against his pictured face. For a moment I watched, my fingers working convulsively, my features contorted with fury. And as I watched, all my love for her turned to implacable hatred. She was still unaware of my presence. For an instant I was on the point of leaping forward and fastening my fingers on her soft white throat. Then another idea came to me, and mastering myself, I quietly left the room and went back to the laboratory. She loves him, I muttered to myself fiercely. Well, so be it then. She shall go to him. For the next few hours I worked steadily. By noon I had the bath ready. After dinner I said to Emily, "Will you come to the laboratory for a few minutes, dear? I have a surprise there for you." My honeyed tones utterly deceived her. Without a word she followed me. Not until she was within the bathroom, with the door locked, did I reveal my fury. And then it was too late for her to escape. If the disappearance of Hannington had created a sensation in Oakston, then the equally mysterious disappearance of Emily raised a furor. Now I was openly under suspicion, and again, coming with a warrant, the police ransacked the whole house. They found no proof of my guilt, but they did find something which helped prove my innocence. Pinned to the underside of my pillow, they found a note from Emily, saying that she could no longer bear to live with me and was going away. The note was dated on the day she had disappeared, and she had probably written it that forenoon while I was in the laboratory. Nothing could have been more fortunate. Those dull-brained police never thought of arresting me after that. I posed as an injured, heartbroken husband and offered huge rewards for the return of my wife. Detectives searched for her all over the country, while I laughed in my sleeve. What fools they were! I now began to believe myself all-powerful. In my hands I held the secret by which I could destroy my enemies at will. After the excitement had died down, I filled the tub again with acid, ready for the next unlucky man who should offend me. But all this time I was oppressed by an indefinable dread. At night my sleep was troubled with hideous dreams, dreams in which my two victims would come and stand beside my bed and menace me. As time passed, I realized that these were not ordinary dreams, but were inspired by the spirits of my victims. I had always sneered at supernatural beliefs, but after a time I became convinced that death does not end all, and realized that malignant influences were encompassing me. And nightly my dreams grew worse. Then my dreams became living nightmares. The spirits would come and beckon me to the laboratory, and I would follow. I would not want to follow, but I could not resist them for long. They would lead me to the tub of acid, and then sink into it and disappear, leaving me staring down at them in fascination. As the weeks passed, I began to wonder if these visions were not more than visions. They seemed so clear that it seemed almost impossible they were merely dreams. I asked myself whether I really remained in bed while they were taking place, or if I actually went to the laboratory. Last Sunday night my questions found an answer. I had been dreaming as usual, and was following the spirits to the bathroom, when suddenly I awoke. Great heaven! I was standing in the middle of the laboratory. I was standing in pitch blackness, my heart beating like a trip hammer, my ears strained, listening for a sound. How long I stood like this I do not know, but all at once I heard a laugh. I recognized the voice. It was Hannington's. Then sounded another laugh, low and mocking, and I knew it was Emily's. And then I heard them speak. "Friday night, Harley. Beware of Friday night." And then the dark laboratory was wrapped in the silence of the grave. Uttering a frantic cry, I staggered to the electric switch. I snapped it. No result. The laboratory was still enshrouded by Stygian blackness. I felt my way back to my room, hands before my face, knocking against different objects as I reeled blindly forward. Twice I could have sworn that a cold hand slapped my burning face. Finally reaching my bed, I crawled between the sheets and tossed in misery the remainder of the long night. That was 6 nights ago. Tonight is Friday night. Since Sunday night I have not slept a wink. I dare not sleep. I know that if I sleep, some danger will assail me. What that danger is, I do not know, but I do know that it exists. My narrative is finished. I do not intend that any mortal shall ever read it, however, and in the morning I will destroy it. I have written it in an effort to keep awake. My eyelids feel like leaden weights. My nights of sleeplessness are beginning to tell against me. What would I not give for 1 little hour of perfect rest, 1 hour of blissful unconsciousness? But I dare not sleep. But how sore my eyes are, how they smart. Perhaps I had better close them and rest them a little while. That is what I will do. I will close my eyes and try to drive those awful thoughts from my mind. But I must not keep them closed too long, for if I did that I might fall asleep, and I must not sleep. Extract from letter of Mrs. Pearson, Dr. Grimsby's nearest neighbor, to her niece in Boston. Dear Ellen, the most horrible thing has happened. You remember how George Hannington and Mrs. Grimsby disappeared? Well, Ellen, they have solved the mystery at last. It was Dr. Grimsby who murdered them. Oh, it is so awful, awful. He discovered a terrible acid that would melt up a person's body just as you would melt up soap, and destroyed them with it. But Nemesis has overtaken the brute at last. For several days there had been no sign of life at Dr. Grimsby's, so this morning the police investigated. What do you suppose they found? Listen, Ellen, for this is terribly exciting. They found a table in his bedroom covered with sheets of manuscript, the full story of how he had done his fiendish work. Then they went to the laboratory, and what do you suppose they found there? In a little bathroom at the end of the laboratory was a tub partly full of acid, and it was the color of turbid water. The police tested the acid and found it would melt things in a few minutes. They say that the doctor must have fallen asleep, and while sleepwalking, have thrown himself into the acid. The end of The Acid in the Laboratory by Gordon Philip England.